Why do Democrats hate Americans so much? When Hillary was running for president, she said half of Donald Trump's supporters were, quote, a basket of deplorables. Recently, Joe Biden, at a speech in Philadelphia, told America that half of us are semi-fascist terrorists. Under the First Amendment of the Constitution, we have the right to express our opinions, and if we disagree with the left, they don't have the right to take away our freedom of speech. Clearly, the statement by Hillary and Biden are designed to silence the conservatives in America. Many Americans find it easier to go along with the left and give up their right to disagree. What would America look like today if our founding fathers would have given in to the king and not fought for their freedom? Today we must fight to take America back. Join the new generation of patriots who believe in the Constitution. Join the new revolution in America. Fire your shot for freedom by voting on November the 8th. Help all Americans take back our country. It's time for Black and White, a show that wants to bring all of us together, talking again about the issues that concern us. It's time to hear from people who only want to deal with facts. It's time for you to re-engage in your right of American free speech. It's time for Black and White. Welcome to the Candidates Corner edition on Blacks and Whites, and joining us today is Bruce Fenton, who's running for the Senate in New Hampshire, and he's got an interesting way he's communicating to his people about his what he calls 1, 2, 3 plan. Welcome, Bruce, to the Candidates Corner.
Hi, how are you? Thanks so much for having me.
My pleasure. I wanted to spend just a little bit before we get into your 1, 2, 3 plan. I wanted to talk to you about something that you seem to be somewhat passionate on, and that is the president's inflation plan, which doesn't seem to be doing anything for inflation. I write a lot of commentary for alternating for about 35 blogs, and I've written several commentaries about this executive order. And first of all, I don't think the president has the power to do that. Only the Congress can do those things. Even the Speaker of the House less a year ago said Biden doesn't have the ability to forgive loans. But the first article that I wrote about what was going on is, you may be familiar with the term, although you're quite a bit younger than me, so you may not remember the movie called Gaslight. But what's going on when a person is being gaslighted or gaslit is they're being lied to, manipulated, and to be thinking that what they've been thinking about is all wrong, and what they need to do is concentrate on what the person is saying. I believe that the inflation thing was basically a lie to the American people. There isn't anything in there. The Congressional Budget Office, University of Pennsylvania Wharton School, all the number crunchers said there's nothing in here to deal with inflation. In fact, I believe it was an out and outright lie, because they figured the people would not take the time to read the 700 pages. They read the cover and bought the book, and including some of the people who passed it, and one of them being the senator from West Virginia, Mr. Manchin, who was supposedly going to get a pipeline, but now he finds out that maybe he's not going to get his pipeline for his vote. So he made a bad deal. What's your sense of the inflation bill, or the inflation executive order?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. It's not going to help inflation. These are the same politicians that told us 2 years ago that we weren't going to have inflation, and then they said it was no big deal, and it's a very big deal. And those of us who followed economics called it. I certainly called it exactly, and I don't really brag about that, because I don't think it took some kind of great forecasting to see. I think it was very, very obvious that we were going to have this huge inflation. When you print money from thin air like this without accountability, you get a lot of inflation, and that's exactly what we've seen. And I believe it's completely because of printing the money from thin air. If you really want to address inflation, you have to address the soundness of our money, and it's very unsound right now, and have better monetary policy. But what they're actually doing is going to increase inflation, and they're harming the economy because of all these extra regulations and everything that are always part of these bills. But they're actually increasing inflation because these kind of all of this spending and debt forgiveness and these kind of things, that's partly paid for by taking worker wages, and it partly paid for by printing money from thin air, which also takes from worker purchasing power in the form of inflation. So yeah, definitely bad policy. And unfortunately, this has gone on so long that almost $800 billion bill or $739 billion bill a few weeks ago, we don't even really think much of it. It's just like, oh, another 700 billion and another 700 billion. The first time they did this in 2008, that first 800 billion, it was big news. Now they do it like it's going to lunch. And that's very damaging and very dangerous for the future of the global economy and especially the US economy.
You know, I interviewed a forensic psychiatrist some time ago, and she is called as an expert witness to examine what the intent of the action was that somebody done, either whether they were alive or after they were dead, concerning a crime. And she made the comment, which I've stolen, and I'm perfectly willing to admit that I stole it and used it many times. She said that the principals in the Biden administration are not very good chess players. And what she meant by that, she said a chess player is somebody who anticipates 2 or 3 steps down the road. They don't even anticipate one. How the president could go in on the first day in office and sign a bill to fundamentally change the infrastructure of energy in the United States and not expect prices to go up, and then not to do anything about it and say, well, tough it out, or we'll try and buy oil from Saudi Arabia, or and when we have it. And so it was a situation that time and time again, the Defense Department was not responsible for the withdrawal of the troops from Afghanistan. In the final withdrawal, it was the State Department. Apparently, nobody in the State Department gave any consideration to $85 billion worth of high quality, high tech, effective weapons that were left on the base. Nobody thought about it. And now we've got the college situation, another 730 or 300 billion. They told us 2 days later, they told us it was 500 billion. Now they're telling us it could be $1 trillion. Nobody figured out how they were going to pay for it. And when the White House was asked recently, how are you going to pay for this potentially $1 trillion? They had no idea. So we have a government who says, gee, this sounds like a good idea, let's go do that. But they don't have any understanding what the outcome is going to be in doing that. And so I want to ask you about your 1, 2, 3 plan, because I think what's very important. I believe that part of the problem that the Republicans face is their messaging. The Democrats have given us a huge plate of potential things to talk about, whether it's the borders, whether it's Ukraine, whether it's inflation, whether it's student loans, whatever. They've given us all these things. They're all distractions. And we're taking the bait to try and convince in our commercials and talking to people about 12 different things. We can't deal, Americans cannot digest 12 different things. And so because we're talking about the issues, but not putting up a lot of solutions, that's what intrigued me about your 1, 2, 3 plan, because you're a Republican candidate who agrees that the things are out of control and out of whack, but you've got an idea, constructive idea of how we can fix it, called your 1, 2, 3 plan. So tell us about it.
Yeah, so it's related to what we were just talking about, this inflation bill, because that was in coming up with the numbers. Part of it was for the cost of just this bill that they did a few weeks ago. Just the cost of this bill, we could cover my plan for an entire year. Okay. And if we didn't give the bailout to BlackRock, we could cover it for almost another year. And if we stopped just a few of these, drone bombings and domestic spying and things like that, pretty easily you could cover it for 5 years. And what this would do, so the one would be $100,000 in investment income. You'd have no taxes on the first $100,000 in investment income. Two for $200,000 in personal income, and 3 for $300,000 in business income. So if your business has income where you earn anything, even above 300,000, you could earn $1 million from it, but the first $300,000 would be tax-free. So if you have a little side hustle that you make $1,000 a quarter on, no taxes. If you make 290,000, no tax. If you make $1 million, the first 300, no taxes. Same for income. So whether if you make 30,000 a year or 190,000 or anything in between, no taxes. If you make above it, no taxes on the first 200. So it'd be a tax cut for everybody, rich and poor, and everybody in between. And it would be pretty much a total tax elimination for, call it 5 years, with very, very minor trimmings that nobody would even notice. I mean, this bill, like I say, we didn't even have this bill a few weeks ago, and that would cover it for an entire year. But it would be no taxes for any of the poor, working class, and pretty much the entire middle class, and even wealthier people, because wealthier people might have all three buckets. They might have they'd certainly probably have investment income, and over 200,000 in regular income. They may have a business too. So altogether, that would be 600,000. With a spouse, $1 million too. So real significant for everybody, wealthy, but especially it's really a big tax cut for the middle class. And the middle class is the one that's hurting the most right now. And they're the ones who've suffered the most. And they're the ones who've had to tighten their belts the most. And they're the ones who are hurt the most. And the working class and poor especially are hurt the most by the high inflation. And government hasn't made cuts. Government is just spending and spending and spending. There's still government employees that haven't gone back to work because of COVID. They're working from home in blissful glee with their healthy 6-figure jobs and many vacation days and big budgets and these kind of things. And they haven't tightened their belt. And they need to. We need to cut spending in Washington and return that money to the people. Let people keep that money and keep it in their pocket. So that's what that plan is all about. And it's about the broader concept of putting more money in the hands of the workers and wage earners who earned it, and less hands in the hands of politicians.
So we're speaking with Bruce Fenton, who's running for the Senate in New Hampshire, and he's talking about his 1, 2, 3 plan. Let me drill down. What would you cut? How would you go about downsizing the government? How do you do that?
I'm very much on the libertarian side. So, for me, that's, there's sort of theory and practicality. In theory, I'd like to cut almost all of it. My ideal bill would be like Thomas Massey's one-line bill. It said, this bill abolishes the Department of Education, only I would add 30 other departments to it. In an ideal world. In today's environment, that's a little bit hard to pass. And I actually said, oh, that wouldn't pass. I said it wouldn't realistically pass. But then I corrected myself, and I remembered the times that we're in are quite extraordinary. So I wouldn't put anything out of the realm of possibility. We could, unfortunately, face such turmoil in 2 years and such economic hardship in 2 years that a bill like that could actually be realistic. But in the present environment, if I was in office today, for example, or last year, then there are more realistic cuts that I think you could get bipartisan support. And starting with just some of these big boondoggles. I mean, as I mentioned, the bill just now, that'd cover for about a year, BlackRock, a couple of these other things. I mean, we've spent something like $8 or $9 trillion or allocated $8 or $9 trillion just in sort of loosely in the name of what we're kind of calling COVID, which isn't a sensible economic policy, regardless of how somebody feels about health policy. It's not, which I feel has been very, very bad as well. But the economic policy, there's nothing in any economic textbook that said, hey, if this happens, print trillions and trillions of dollars from thin air. It's just very, very poor economic policy that we should be aware of.
I have one more quick question for you, then we're gonna have to take a break, and we can finish it. We can cover it after the break. I heard yesterday that most of the hundreds of billions of dollars that has been appropriated for schools under the various COVID bills has yet to be spent. It's sitting there, not being spent, not helping. And I'm on a mission right now to try and figure out how much money in all the appropriations that we have had since Biden came in, how much of that has still been unappropriated. And with that, we're speaking with Bruce Fenton, who is the Republican nominee for the Senate in the state of New Hampshire. We'll be right back after this break. Thank you. And let me reset here. Okay. Now, before we go into part two, I usually like to ask guests, when you were pitched to me for an appearance on the network, there was the principal thing was your 1, 2, 3, which we just talked about. But in the time from when the press release was sent out to today, is there anything else that's important to you that you'd like to get some airtime on?
Not really, not that I can think of. I mean, I generally talk a lot about freedom and liberty and, getting government out of our lives and out of our wallets. A little bit of cryptocurrency is always a popular topic. Yeah, those are the main things.
Okay, so we'll come back and we'll talk a little bit about the campaign. Okay,
Great. Sounds good.
here we go. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Welcome back on the Politician's Corner on Black and White Network, and we're speaking with Bruce Fenton, who is the GOP Senate nominee for the state of New Hampshire. Tell us about what's going on in the campaign.
Sure. Not the nominee yet. I still have a primary coming up. But the campaign's going great. I'm getting out the word on liberty and, really enjoying touring the state, traveling around, talking to a lot of people. That's one of the cooler things. I live here in New Hampshire, but most people don't really tour their state unless it's their job or something like this. So I go to just about every town and meet a lot of people and hear from a lot of people. And some things are really touching. Some of the things you hear, and I feel like I get a real it's a blessing to be able to shake hundreds of hands and talk to that many people, because you get a real feel of what's really going on in America and what people really care about. I don't pay much attention to, like, I don't do a lot of internal polls. I don't really do polls because I feel like I don't need a poll to tell me what people care about. I'm meeting them every day, shaking their hand. I'm looking them in the eyes and seeing what they care about. And that's encouraging, because I think a lot of people care about the same things, and I hope that can unite us.
So when is your primary?
It's September 13th, a week from today.
And what do you think?
Well, it's my first time running. If Twitter was the indication, I'd be winning by 80%. I have more social media than all the other candidates combined, but unfortunately, Twitter doesn't usually translate into votes. So the more conventional polling, I'm not doing nearly as well. But there's a lot of undecideds and a lot of unenrolleds. And there's a lot of new movers, and it's a very unusual time right now. I mean, anything could happen. I mean, typically primaries are not very well attended, but I'm the type of candidacy that it motivates. The people who like me most are often people who haven't voted before, and a pretty small number of typical non-voters showing up. They can swing things quite a bit. So we'll see. I'm optimistic. Either way, I've had fun getting the word out and meeting so many people and seeing what's going on out there in the state.
What are the people telling you are their greatest concerns?
It's interesting. All the other candidates had this similar answer. We were asked this in a debate, and it's also the same answer that the pollsters come up, which is the inflation. I had one different answer, which I see reflected in the people that I talk to, and that's tyranny. Inflation's a big deal for sure, very, very much so. I come from an economic field. I've been in finance my whole life, 30 years professionally in the economics and finance field, and I've actually been quite fortunate to have had a very good track record. I've predicted things again and again and again. I've got to be honest, quite a really good track record in investments. And understanding things like inflation. And I called this inflation a couple of years ago. So it is really important. But to me, I think tyranny is a more important thing. I think freedom and human rights and our Constitution, if we don't have these things, you don't have anything. And that goes for Democrats and Republicans too. Once you lose freedom, and I had somebody from an Eastern European country talking to me about this in relation to my campaign. And he said, a lot of Americans don't understand. There's a certain tipping point, because you haven't lived through it. But there's a tipping point where once you lose the freedom, it's gone. And then you can rail all you want, and you could be a Democrat and say, wait a minute, this isn't what I meant. Too late. too late. Once you lose things like CBDCs, where they'll have the ability to potentially shut off your money, the way they could shut off your speech, or certain tipping points with right now what's protected us is our First Amendment, but that we've seen in Canada and Australia, they had similar amendments that were eventually overturned. In Canada, they made it what was called provisional, and we've seen what's happened in Australia and New Zealand. So, we can't have that. That without that freedom, we have nothing. So, to me, fighting for our basic human rights, it sounds corny and cliche, but I really do believe it's about freedom and human liberty and the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. And I think a lot of people share that. There's a lot of people that I meet who at least that's what they like about me and my message. I might be biased. Maybe there's only several hundred of us, but those are certainly the people that I'm meeting on a regular basis and who come to my events and who are supporters.
How many people are you competing against for the Republican nomination?
There's 10 total candidates in the race, and it's an open primary. So it's a big field.
10 candidates?
Yeah. Not all of them are really actively campaigning. There's sort of 5 of us that are kind of called front runners often by that are in the major debates and that kind of thing. I'm one of those 5. And between the 5 of us, it's like 99% of the polling probably, or something like that. But even still, kind of a 5-way split, most likely according to the polls. And there's typically about 150,000 people have voted in the past, 143,000, something like that. I think it'll probably be a bit higher this year. There's a lot of interesting races and a lot of people interested in politics. There's 2 congressional races as well. And there's a lot of motivated Republicans who are getting early in the process because they want to see a red wave. It's actually not that early in the process. The general election's coming right up too. We just have a very late primary.
So what are your competitors saying that's different than you?
I think the biggest difference with me is that I'm much more freedom and liberty focused, and more leave me alone, is totally against kind of any kind of involvement, but by the government as much as possible. I want government as small as possible. So some of the biggest differences between my opponents and I, one is the Ukraine involvement. I'm not for any U.S. tax dollars being spent unless it's voluntary. If somebody wants to voluntarily put it in their taxes or voluntarily send it, of course, by all means, I support that. But I'm not in favor of any boots on the ground or any soldiers being sent there, or any money being sent there. Another big difference is the drug war. I'm a much more libertarian stance. I'm not in favor of any drug war at all at the federal level, and really not at the state level, to be frank. It's easier from a campaign standpoint because that's a controversial issue. It's easy for me to say, oh, let's do it at the states. But genuinely, I care a great deal about addiction and crime and other problems. This isn't something I flippantly say. I've thought a lot about it. And I've also looked at the data. I've looked at places like Portugal and other places and what has worked and not worked. And the current drug war has not worked. We've criminalized addiction, and there's a lot of people in prison that would be better served with medical help and things like that. But so drug war is another difference. And that's also different from a classic Republican point of view. Ron Paul was one of the early Republicans who was against the drug war. But it's not a classic position, but it is changing, especially demographic wise. Among some of the student groups, that's overwhelmingly popular, especially cannabis, federal legalization of cannabis. I've seen polls that indicate it's like 85-90%. So that's something that, just like gay marriage, it's very demographic driven. As those voters get older, that's an issue that's likely, if not now, within 15 years, it's likely cannabis will be decriminalized at a federal level just because of who those voters are. And then firearms rights, I'm more we're all Republicans, so everybody is to some degree pro Second Amendment, but I'm the only one I know of who's actively in favor of abolishing the National Firearms Act and actually reducing current regulations. I don't want any new regulations. I want to reduce them. So those kind of things, more libertarian, I would say, and some of these things conflict too. They conflict with sort of every Republican has identified themselves as pro-life. But in New Hampshire, we have abortion is allowed up to 25 weeks. So the governor calls that pro-choice. And at a federal level, we've all said we don't want any new abortion ban or new federal laws. One difference from me is because of my stance on drugs. I believe in, over-the-counter abortion pills or birth control or anything else. Just because I don't believe in the drug war, especially at a federal level. So those are some of the things, probably more, a combination of hippie and libertarian, that are different from the other Republicans. But it's interesting, I think this liberty is the future of and I know these positions are not for every Republican, but I think that's kind of the point. I think being a broad party and letting, I don't agree with these things. I mean, I don't. Methamphetamines, I think, are a horrible thing. I don't allow them on my property. I don't want anything to do with them. I strongly encourage my kids to absolutely positively stay away. And I think it's a human tragedy that anybody uses these things. It's a terrible thing. But I just don't. So it's not that I support these things. It's just that I don't see government as the solution. Politicians aren't the solution. I'd like to see us go back to a much smaller government where people kind of mind their own business and do their own things and take care of their own problems. And unless somebody comes into their space and invades their property and threatens their life or liberty, government pretty much stays out of it. That's kind of my overall vision for America that I'd like to see.
But as it relates to drugs, let me suggest that last year, 107,000 people were killed by overdoses of fentanyl.
Yeah.
Most of it which came across the southern border. It came into the country illegally. And
Yes.
I see time and time again, day after day after day, raids of thousands upon thousands of pills that are taken. One guy had enough to kill everybody in the United States.
Yeah, I mean,
we have to do something to try and stop the flow of these illicit drugs that are coming into the United States. The most recent story is they're using colored tablets now to entice young children in elementary school to get into it. How does the government stand by and not do anything about open borders that allow this stuff to freely come across the borders?
Again, definitely a huge problem. But the thing is, we just haven't been effective. Government has there's not much that government is effective at. Now here's an interesting point on the fentanyl. There's two things. One thing that I do think is a legitimate role of government in this is to investigate the origins and the possibilities of this being a foreign attack vector. Because fentanyl in particular, there's a great deal of evidence that this is being pushed by China, and China is, I mean, that's a different story. That's a national security matter. So the other interesting thing about fentanyl, there are a lot of side effects of the drug war, and unfortunately fentanyl is one of them. What has happened with drugs, because of the prohibition, drug potency has gone through the roof. So you have every drug, even cannabis, is way more potent and especially tragic. The original creation of crack, methamphetamines, and now fentanyl. It's because you can fit enough, the dosage that would have taken, the amount to get people high with other drugs. You remember Miami Vice in the 80s, they had these big, containers of cocaine. They could fit in a shoebox millions and millions of dollars worth of fentanyl because it is so potent, which makes it so dangerous. So unfortunately, it is partly a side effect of the drug war. In a natural world where these things were not, prohibition. Remember, Al Capone came as a result of prohibition. And I'm against alcohol, by the way. I don't drink. I don't believe in alcohol at all. I think alcohol is terrible, but I don't want to impose my view on others. I think prohibition in Al Capone's day was wrong, and I wouldn't want to see alcohol prohibition. And believe me, I don't make light of it. It is a horrible problem. I just don't think government is going to be the solution. And I think if we put our efforts into, dealing with, I mean, the best thing to do is prevent people from trying in the first place. A lot of education, working on children and things like that. There are places like Portugal where drugs are widely available, Amsterdam, other places. They don't have especially Portugal, their addiction problems actually went down. And you also remember, you can put the cartels out of business. That's not insignificant. There's a lot of death and a lot of destruction, and the cartels are the ones lacing these things with bad drug, with the things that are more deadly and stuff like that. So I'm not saying my way is some magic solution by any means, but I do have an overall belief in a couple things. One is that government often makes things worse. It costs a lot. It's usually inefficient, and it does harm freedom, especially if you're going after addicts and things like that. Anybody should be able to put anything in their body, even things I don't agree with. Pretty much just to be clear, pretty much everything I listed, I don't agree with. But my great grandfather was a Texas sheriff, and it's very, very interesting to read his diaries, because back in those days he had a lot of power, but he was a volunteer. He was a farmer. He didn't want to use the law, and it was very rare. It was only like one murder in 20 years that he dealt with, and a couple other crimes that he, it was a hassle. You could tell from his diary, it's a hassle for him. Oh boy, he wants to be working on his farm. He didn't want to be enforcing laws. And I'd like to see our country go more those ways, where people kind of mind their own business, because going the other way, where we have this huge police state, the cartels exist because of it. They're the modern Al Capones. We put Al Capone out of or people like him out of business, by ending that prohibition. But again, I appreciate, and here's the thing that I say to Republicans, a lot of them aren't going to, that's the number one thing, by the way, that Republicans disagree with me at the meetings. I go to a lot of town committee meetings. There's sheriffs, there's all it's Republican meetings. So you can imagine that's the number one least popular position among some Republicans. It's not all, it's some. But here's the thing that I mentioned is that, in our general election, that's actually huge because it's number 2 after abortion. So among young people, it's number 1. So it could be the difference. Maggie Hassan only won by 1,000 votes. So I do say, even to the Republicans who disagree, hey, you may think I'm crazy on the drug war, but if it's a matter of winning the election, every single Republican would definitely rather have me than Maggie Hassan, even if they don't agree with that position. And it could be enough to win because, like I say, it's number 2 with the voters. There's a lot of Trump. If you count Trump, there's a lot of people with Trump derangement syndrome. They're really, really upset about Trump, and then abortion, and then the drug. They ask about drugs a lot.
We've been speaking with Bruce Fenton, who is the nominee for the Senate nomination of the Republican Party in the state of New Hampshire. How can we follow you?
So it's brucefenton.com. And I'm pretty active on social media. I'm on Twitter. There's a lot of debate clips and things like that on there, on Facebook with just my name, Bruce Fenton. And I definitely like to connect with people and have feedback. And if they're in New Hampshire or know people in New Hampshire, to vote September 13th.
Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much.
And we'll be right back. Hello, this is Dan Perkins, and this message is just for moms. Are you worried about how much money you have lost in your investment account? Are you concerned if it will recover? Inflation is 9.1%, and I believe it's really higher than that, and I think you would agree. You have experienced rising prices for food, gasoline, and many other items. Isn't it time for you to consider investing in gold with some of your money to protect your future? Start by finding out if gold is right for you. Go to the Black and White's website and click on the gold bar. You'll get a couple of questions, and then we'll forward you on to Ira, our gold guru. He will help you figure out if it's right for you.